Picture this. You're standing at the edge of a medieval village at dawn, about to begin a 300-mile journey to a distant monastery. There are no road signs, no maps in your pocket, no GPS on your phone. The path ahead disappears into a dark forest, where bandits lurk and wolves hunt. One wrong turn could lead you into trackless wilderness, where you'll wander in circles until you die of starvation or exposure. Yet somehow, thousands of medieval people made these journeys successfully every year. How did they do it? How did they navigate across vast distances when getting lost wasn't just inconvenient, it was a death sentence? The answer lies in a sophisticated system of navigation that was part science, part art, and part survival instinct. Medieval people didn't have modern technology, but they had something equally powerful: generations of accumulated knowledge about reading the landscape, following natural signs, and using human networks that stretched across continents. They turned the entire world into a giant map, written in the language of stars, stones, streams, and stories. Medieval navigation began before you ever left home, with a process called route learning that could take months or even years to complete. Professional guides, called conductors or pathfinders, spent their entire lives memorizing specific routes between major destinations. These weren't casual directions, they were precise, step-by-step instructions that included every landmark, every turn, every potential danger, and every place of safety along hundreds of miles of road. A master guide's knowledge was extraordinarily detailed. He knew that after crossing the stone bridge over the Wye River, you walked for exactly the time it takes to say 50 Ave Marias before turning left at the oak tree. With the lightning scar, he knew which inn served safe food and which stream water could be trusted. He memorized the distances between landmarks in terms of walking time, accounting for weather, season, and the condition of travelers. This information was passed down from master to apprentice, through oral tradition, creating libraries of navigation knowledge stored entirely in human memory. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. These guides didn't work alone. They were part of guild networks that controlled travel routes across Europe. The Guides Guild maintained standardized landmark systems, established emergency protocols, and created backup routes when primary paths became impassable. Guild members placed secret markers, carved symbols into trees, and established coded communications that allowed them to share information about road conditions, bandit activity, and seasonal hazards. The most ingenious part of this system was how it handled illiterate travelers. Since most medieval people couldn't read written directions, guides developed elaborate mnemonic techniques using stories, songs, and visual association. A journey might be encoded as a narrative about saints and miracles, with each episode corresponding to a specific landmark or direction change. Pilgrims would memorize these stories during the weeks before departure, turning navigation into an act of devotion and memory training. For those who couldn't afford professional guides, medieval communities developed alternative navigation systems based on religious and social networks. Monasteries, churches, and pilgrimage sites created chains of hospitality that functioned as waypoints across long journeys. A traveler could follow a route from abbey to abbey, knowing that each location would provide food, shelter, and directions to the next safe haven. These religious institutions maintained detailed knowledge about local roads and often employed their own guides to help travelers continue their journeys. The church bell system became an unintentional navigation network. Church bells rang at specific times throughout the day, and experienced travelers learned to recognize the distinctive sound patterns of different communities. By listening carefully, a traveler could determine direction, estimate distance, and identify specific villages even when they couldn't see them. Some regions developed coordinated bell schedules that created audio beacons spanning dozens of miles. Medieval people became masters of celestial navigation, using the sun, moon, and stars as natural compasses that never failed. They knew that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, but they also understood seasonal variations, shadow patterns, and the relationship between time of day and solar position. Experienced travelers could determine precise directions by observing the angle of shadows cast by trees, buildings, or their own walking sticks. Night navigation relied heavily on star patterns that were memorized from childhood. The North Star provided constant direction, but medieval navigators also used constellation movements to estimate time and track their progress. They knew which stars appeared at different seasons and how star positions changed throughout the night. This knowledge allowed them to maintain accurate direction even during multi-day journeys through unmarked wilderness. But the most sophisticated navigation technique involved reading the landscape itself, like a giant book. Medieval travelers learned to interpret topographical features, vegetation patterns, water flow directions, and geological formations as natural maps that revealed their location and pointed toward their destination. They understood that rivers generally flow toward the sea, that certain plants indicate elevation and climate, and that rock formations follow predictable patterns across regions. Master navigators could determine their location by examining soil color, stone types, plant communities, and animal behavior. They knew that specific wildflowers bloomed at certain elevations, that bird migration patterns indicated seasonal directions, and that moss growth on trees revealed dominant wind patterns. This environmental literacy turned every feature of the natural world into a potential navigation aid. Water features provided the most reliable navigation references. Rivers, streams, and watersheds created natural highway systems that medieval travelers followed for hundreds of miles. A pilgrim traveling from England to Rome might follow river valleys for entire sections of the journey, using water flow as a compass and riverbank settlements as waypoints. Professional boatmen and fishermen maintained detailed knowledge about water routes and often served as guides for overland travelers following riverbank paths. The most challenging navigation situations occurred in areas without clear landmarks, dense forests, open moorlands, and mountain regions, where paths disappeared and natural features looked identical for miles. Medieval travelers developed specialized techniques for these environments, including systematic search patterns, emergency shelter construction, and distress signal methods that could attract help from distant communities. In forested areas, travelers learned to read subtle trail markers left by previous groups, broken branches arranged in specific patterns, stone cairns hidden beneath vegetation, and scratched symbols on tree bark that indicated direction and distance. These informal marker systems were maintained by traveling communities and updated regularly by guides who knew their significance. A trained navigator could follow these nearly invisible signs through dense woodland, where untrained travelers would become hopelessly lost. Mountain navigation required understanding of weather patterns, avalanche risks, and altitude effects that could disorient even experienced travelers. Alpine guides developed specialized knowledge about pass conditions, seasonal accessibility, and emergency routes that could save lives when weather turned dangerous. They memorized the locations of caves, shepherds' huts, and emergency food caches that provided survival resources for stranded travelers. Medieval merchants created the most sophisticated commercial navigation networks, driven by economic necessity and competitive advantage. Trading companies maintained their own route guides, established supply depots along major trade roads, and employed professional scouts who constantly updated information about road conditions, political situations, and bandit activity. Merchant guilds shared navigation knowledge among trusted members, while keeping the most profitable routes secret from competitors. The famous Silk Road and other international trade routes were maintained by networks of local guides, who specialized in specific sections of the journey. A merchant traveling from Venice to Constantinople might employ a dozen different guides, each expert in their local territory and responsible for safe passage through their region. These guide networks created a form of international cooperation that transcended political boundaries and religious differences. Merchant navigation also involved understanding currency exchange, local customs, and legal requirements that varied dramatically between regions. A successful trader needed to know not just how to reach his destination, but how to conduct business safely once he arrived. This cultural navigation was as important as geographical knowledge for commercial success. Urban navigation presented its own unique challenges in medieval cities, where street layouts were chaotic. Buildings blocked sightlines, and neighborhoods changed constantly through construction and destruction. City residents developed local expertise that was as specialized as wilderness navigation, knowing shortcuts through private courtyards, safe routes that avoided dangerous districts, and landmark systems based on shops, guilds, and religious buildings. Medieval cities rarely had street names or numbering systems, so urban navigation relied on descriptive references and local knowledge. Directions might involve finding the baker's shop near the church with the broken bell tower, then turning toward the smell of the tannery until you reach the red-painted house with the carved wooden saints. These complex descriptions required intimate familiarity with local communities and their distinctive features. Guild halls, markets, and religious buildings served as urban navigation anchors that provided reference points for travelers unfamiliar with city layouts. Most medieval cities organized themselves around these central institutions, creating logical patterns that experienced visitors could decode even without local guides. The sound of specific trades, distinctive odors from different crafts, and visual landmarks like guild signs helped travelers orient themselves in unfamiliar urban environments. The most dangerous navigation challenges involved political territories, where wars, border disputes, and changing allegiances could turn safe routes into deadly traps overnight. Medieval travelers needed current intelligence about political situations, military movements, and safe passage agreements that might provide protection or create additional risks. This information network was maintained by traveling merchants, religious messengers, and diplomatic couriers, who shared vital intelligence with other travelers. Professional messengers developed the most advanced navigation skills, since their work required speed, accuracy, and the ability to find alternative routes when primary paths became blocked. Royal and ecclesiastical courier services maintained detailed route information, established relay stations, and created backup communication systems that ensured important messages reached their destinations despite obstacles. Message carriers used coded symbols, secret passwords, and trusted contact networks that allowed them to verify their location and find assistance when needed. They memorized multiple routes to every destination and carried letters of safe passage that provided protection in friendly territories. Their navigation knowledge was considered so valuable that messenger guilds closely guarded their techniques and severely punished members who shared route information with unauthorized persons. But even the most skilled navigators sometimes failed. Medieval records contain numerous accounts of travelers who became lost, groups that took wrong turns and ended up hundreds of miles from their intended destinations, and expeditions that simply disappeared into the wilderness, never to be seen again. Getting lost in the medieval world often meant death from exposure, starvation, or attack by wild animals or human predators. When navigation failed, medieval travelers relied on emergency protocols that could save their lives if they remained calm and followed established procedures. These included methods for finding water, constructing emergency shelters, signaling for help, and rationing food supplies while searching for familiar landmarks. Experienced travelers carried emergency supplies and knew basic survival techniques that could keep them alive until rescue arrived, or they found their way back to known routes. The development of written route guides in the later medieval period began to supplement, but never completely replace the oral tradition of navigation knowledge. These early travel guides, called itineraries, provided basic information about distances, landmarks, and accommodations along major routes. However, they were expensive, rare, and often outdated by the time they were copied and distributed. Religious pilgrimage routes generated some of the most detailed written navigation guides, as monasteries and religious authorities wanted to ensure that pilgrims could reach their destinations safely. The famous Camino de Santiago developed an extensive literature of route guides, accommodation listings, and travel advice that helped thousands of pilgrims navigate the dangerous journey across medieval Spain. Medieval navigation techniques created the foundation for all subsequent developments in travel and exploration. The systematic observation of natural phenomena, the creation of landmark networks, and the development of human information systems evolved directly into modern cartography, navigation technology, and transportation infrastructure. Even today, pilots and sailors use celestial navigation techniques that medieval travelers would recognize, and GPS systems follow principles of triangulation and reference point identification that mirror medieval wayfinding methods. The social networks that supported medieval navigation established patterns of international cooperation and information sharing that continue to influence modern travel systems. The concept of standardized routes, safety protocols, and professional guide services derives directly from medieval guild systems and religious hospitality networks. Most importantly, medieval people proved that successful navigation depends more on systematic observation, careful preparation, and community cooperation than on technological tools. They demonstrated that humans can develop remarkable spatial memory and environmental awareness when their survival depends on these skills. So how did medieval people navigate long journeys without maps or compasses? They created an entire civilization dedicated to sharing geographical knowledge, maintaining route information, and supporting travelers through cooperative networks that spanned continents. They turned navigation into both a professional skill and a community responsibility, ensuring that knowledge about safe travel was preserved and transmitted across generations. The next time you use GPS to find a coffee shop or complain about getting lost with all your modern technology, remember the medieval pilgrim who walked 1,000 miles guided only by stars, stories, and the kindness of strangers. They found their way not because the technology existed, but because human intelligence, determination, and cooperation could overcome seemingly impossible challenges. If you enjoy the hidden sides of medieval life, hit subscribe and give this video a like.